Recently, two Australian journalists stationed in China were raided by the Chinese National Security Police in the middle of the night and were restricted from leaving China. The CCP did not explain the reason for such action, but after the Foreign Ministry of Australia stepped in, the journalists were returned to Australia safely. This unprecedented event accelerated the deterioration of the relationship between Australia and China. Presently, there is no Australian journalist stationed in China. Due to the pandemic, Australia-China relations took a turn for the worse earlier this year. The CCP is unsatisfied with Australia calling for an independent investigation into the origin of the CCP virus, and thus has been repeatedly retaliating against Australia. Recently, the Australian government has raised a travel alert, warning Australian nationals in China of the risk of arbitrary arrest. After receiving advice from the Australian embassy about their safety last week, Bill Birtles, a journalist from Australia Broadcasting Corporation, and Michael Smith, a journalist from Australian Financial Review, were both raided in their homes at midnight on September 3rd by Chinese National Security Police. They were interrogated by the police with bright lights and told that they have been restricted from leaving the country. The police warned that they must stay and cooperate with a national security investigation. After being interrogated, the two journalists feared being disappeared and immediately took shelter at the Australian embassies in Beijing and Shanghai respectively. On September 7th, they returned to Australia safely after the Australian Foreign Ministry stepped in. After arriving in Australia, both journalists said that it is a relief to be back in a country with genuine rule of law. As they looked back at their rushed departure from China, they believed that this was a political move from Beijing.
The CCP's National Security Police did not conduct a normal investigative interrogation, but rather a deliberate attempt to exert pressure. We see that these National Security Police chose to act in the middle of the night. This means that they have already been monitoring these journalists.
Bill Birtles was stationed in Beijing for a long time, and his reports focused on the epidemic and the situation in Hong Kong. Another Shanghai-based journalist, Michael Smith, is an economic reporter whose main concern is the Australia-China trade war. The two journalists did not work together.
By deliberately and directly threatening Australian journalists, the CCP released the message to warn the Australian government that if the Australian government continues to show unfriendly behavior, such as holding the CCP accountable for the CCP virus in the international diplomatic affairs, then any Australian nationals in China will be arrested at any time.
On September 7th, the Foreign Correspondents Club of China issued a statement condemning the CCP's action as a shocking threat to foreign journalists in China. The statement said foreign journalists face the threat of arbitrary detention simply because of their work. Chinese-Canadian author Sheng Xue believes that this incident will again show the world the true colors of the CCP.
It is a good thing for the international community and also for the democracy process in China, because it allows the international community to see the real face of the CCP and to experience that the CCP has not entered modern civilization because it does not respect freedom, democracy, rule of law, or human rights. The international community can also feel for themselves what the inhumane practices from authoritarian tyranny like the CCP are like.
On August 14th, Chinese-Australian journalist Cheng Lei was arrested for violating the national security law. The local authority did not disclose the details of her arrest. Experts suspected that her arrest was related to her criticism of the CCP epidemic on Facebook.
Violations of the CCP's national security law are actually pocket crimes so ill-defined and vague that they can be difficult to reach a verdict on. Any speech or actions that the CCP is unhappy about can be determined as a violation and a crime. By doing this, the CCP's real purpose is to send out a strong message that this is a kind of hostage diplomacy. Of course, the relationship between both countries will only deteriorate quickly with this kind of diplomacy.
Right now, there is no official Australian correspondent stationed in China, for the first time since the diplomatic relations were established between the two countries in 1972. Experts believe that the Australia-China relationship has hit rock bottom.
According to a new report by the National Association of Scholars, the College Board has partnered closely with the Chinese Communist Party for over a decade, allowing Beijing to influence Chinese language and culture teaching in K-12 classrooms across the United States. On September 6th, the report released found that the College Board, a New York-based nonprofit best known for administering the SAT and AP standardized exams for college admissions, Work with the CCP to develop an AP Advanced Placement Chinese Language and Culture course for high schools, help China gain control over training for Chinese language teaching in the country, and strongly promoted Beijing-funded Confucius Institutes and Confucius classrooms. Billed as Chinese language and culture programs, Confucius Institutes and classrooms have drawn heavy criticism over its role in spreading Chinese propaganda and suppressing free speech on college campuses and K-12 classrooms. At the report's online launch hosted by the Epoch Times American Thought Leaders Program, Rochelle Peterson, the report author and NAS Senior Research Fellow, said, China has managed to build out an entire educational system before the public caught on to what has happened. She added, it co-opted a prestigious, respected name, the College Board, gaining an access it could never have earned outright by working from within organizations that Americans knew and trusted. The findings come amid heightened scrutiny over the CCP's efforts to influence American universities, as well as its aggressive campaign to steal U.S. research and technology. According to the report, in 2003, the College Board worked with Beijing to formulate the AP Chinese language course, with the Chinese government covering half of the $1.37 million development costs. In exchange, the regime was able to influence what was taught in the high school course and push for instruction in simplified Chinese characters, Peterson said. After the CCP took power in China, it imposed simplified characters in the 1950s as part of an attempt to eradicate traditional culture embodied in traditional Chinese script. Traditional Chinese script is still used in Taiwan and Hong Kong. Peterson said, as a result, American students of Chinese would be unable to read the older, more traditional literature that party chairman Mao Zedong had sought to supplant. The College Board also helped the CCP train American instructors who taught Chinese by partnering with it to host the National Chinese Language Conference, the largest annual gathering of Chinese language educators in the country. The chief sponsor of the conference, organized by the College Board, is Hanban, an office with China's Ministry of Education that oversees Confucius Institutes around the world. Peterson described this partnership as perhaps one of the Chinese government's most effective investments in American education, and it has effectively cornered the market on Chinese language instruction at the K-12 level in the United States. The report said that at the 2014 conference, College Board CEO David Coleman referred to Hanban as the sun whose light the College Board, the moon, was so honored to reflect. The board also collaborates with Hanban on its Chinese guest teacher program, which creates a pipeline of Chinese government-selected teachers flowing into American K-12 schools, Peterson said. The visiting teacher program has brought more than 1,650 Chinese teachers to the United States since 2006. In addition, the board sponsored 20 Confucius Institutes and classrooms. According to a U.S. Senate subcommittee report, 2019, there were more than 500 Confucius classrooms across K-12 grade schools. There are currently around 67 Confucius Institutes at U.S. universities, according to the NAS estimates. In August, the U.S. State Department designated the Confucius Institute U.S. Center, a D.C.-based organization that promotes Confucius Institutes and classrooms, a diplomatic mission, saying it formed part of the CCP's global influence and propaganda apparatus. Senator of State Mike Pompeo recently expressed hope that all Confucius Institutes could be shut down by the end of this year. Peterson said the Chinese regime's influence campaign involves offering huge sums of money to U.S. educational institutions. She said, the College Board, colleges and universities, other institutions have found it incredibly convenient to be co-opted by the Chinese government because they're being remunerated handsomely. The College Board did not respond to a request for comment. The NAS urged Congress to require the board to cut ties with the CCP as a condition of it receiving federal funding. The report said the board has received $116 million in federal funding since 2008. The report also called for the closure of Confucius classrooms and the replacement of the AP Chinese Language and Culture Test and the National Chinese Language Conference. The NAS recommended the Departments of Education and Defense to convene a working group to prepare an alternative Chinese language and culture test. The two departments did not specifically respond to a request for comment about these recommendations.
Zhujin Chao, a disabled petitioner from Yanjian City, Jiangxi Province, was stopped by more than 20 officers at Beijing's railway station on September 8th as she and her husband traveled to the nation's capital to lodge a complaint to the National Public Complaints and Proposals Administration. After local officials at her village forced her to sign a demolition agreement for her home 8 years ago, Zhen Chao was beaten, leading to lifelong paralysis. After payments for her medical and nursing expenses were suspended in May, Zhen was left hopeless and decided to raise her case in Beijing.
When we left home last night, people who were watching me followed me 24/7. Wherever I went, they followed. They even grabbed my wheelchair and wouldn't let me go. Finally, with the help of a friend, we got on the train. Today, we arrived in Beijing at 10:30 a.m., and so did a man who was watching me. As soon as we got out of the station, we were stopped by more than 20 local officers. Some bystanders came to watch and support me. They filmed these videos and sent them to me. We were stuck at the train station until after 12 p.m. Then I was taken to a police station near Beijing railway station. A person bought me bean vermicelli, considering that I can't take rice. A dozen retrievers blocked my wheelchair and wouldn't let me pass, bruising my hands.
Jiu and her husband were held until 6 p.m.
We're outside the police station now. They have about 15 people following us. They asked me to go back to the police station. I won't because I saw the police station arranging the cars for my hometown to come, to take me back by force. I said, isn't such action forbidden now? He said, there's no such thing as illegal. Money can buy everything. I'm going to the National Public Complaints and Proposals Administration, but they won't let me go. I told them, you may kill me if you take me back by force. It'll be you who kills me. I won't go to death by myself for no reason at all. You caught me, pinching a paraplegic person. Are you still human? Do you still have humanity? He said, we can't do anything about it.
On the morning of July 13, 2012, Chen Jinshen and Zhu Yangming, directors of Chengde village, brought several local ruffians and hooligans to Zhu Yanshen's home and forced her to sign a blank agreement that will be used to demolish her house. The local ruffians began to beat and kick her and pushed her down the steps. She rolled for more than 4 meters and failed to climb up. The village leaders beat her into paralysis in the morning and came back to talk about demolition in the afternoon. This incident resulted in Zhu's paraplegia due to thoracic spinal cord compression of central nerves, loss of mobility in both legs, and incontinence and lifelong paralysis. It is reported that the demolition company involved in Zhu's case is the Comprehensive Demolition Office of Yujin City. The office director's brother-in-law is said to be the director of Yujin Bureau of Personnel, so the Public Security Bureau has so far refused to file the case. The government also refused to pay compensation for Zhu's injury. It only pays for medical and nursing each month. Those payments were suspended in May.